Safety, let's do that quickly first and just kind of get it out of the way, because the Giants are overloaded with safeties. They probably don't need to add any safeties. Their safeties are all under contract for this year. Jabril Peppers is the only one not under a longer-term deal. So for me, and the only guy they have on the roster right now that's a free agent is Nate Ebner, who's mostly a special teams player. I would imagine that's a guy they would try to bring back in some way, shape, or form, given his contributions on special teams. If you watch the Joe Judge show, you know what Joe Judge thinks of him as a special teams player.
Yeah.
But I would not expect them, Paul, to be big players in free agency or the draft at that position.
No, I think the only way that they wind up taking a safety would be at the very end of the third day if a guy just looked to be such an incredible athlete that they said to themselves, oh, you know what? He could be an upgrade, let's say, on the coverage teams, potentially. Remember, Cody Core was out all of last year on injured reserve, with an injury, and he was a key special teamer the year before, who, is still under contract right now, but you don't know what he's going to be able to bring to the table as he tries to come back. So I would say this, if they see somebody in the 6th or 7th round and they think this guy can be a hell of a kickoff coverage guy or a punt coverage guy, I could see them potentially pulling the trigger, because we all know that Joe Judge wants to win special teams every weekend.
Medow?
Well, I could also see them, as far as the draft is concerned, if they find a player who can play both positions, corner and safety, I would not be surprised if maybe they head in that direction when it comes to the draft. I just would be surprised, to your points, if they just focus solely on a guy that would be a safety, given what they already have on the roster, and, of course, who's currently under contract, and McKinney, who they just drafted. But, player versatility is important in Patrick Graham's scheme, so if they like a guy who maybe has been mixed and matched during his college career, I can absolutely see them taking a draft pick and investing them in that type of player. But I think you'd have to have them showcase they have the ability to be moved around as opposed to just playing the safety spot.
And just for the record, so Giant fans understand what we're talking about, the Giants currently under contract at safety on their roster, the major players, Jabril Peppers, who's going on the last year of his rookie contract. You have Xavier McKinney, the Giants' second-round pick last year. You have Julian Love, their fourth-round pick from a couple of years ago. And then you have Logan Ryan, who was signed late last summer, signed the contract, a new contract extension in December. So they have a lot of guys that, to Lance's point, can play both corner and safety, do a little bit of everything, play different roles. And just generally, guys, we should just talk about the role the safety plays in the defense, because I think it is important, where Patrick Graham used these guys as slot cover guys. McKinney was in that role. Logan Ryan was in that role. They've used them as linebacker types with Jabril Peppers. And then, of course, they really had a focus this year of playing two safeties over the top on a lot of plays. We saw Julian Love in that role. We saw Logan Ryan in that role. We saw Xavier McKinney in that role. And even Jabril Peppers on rundowns as well. So it is a very important position on this defense. And the Giants, really, to me, and this was a question, Lance, I think, was it fact or fiction last week? I think this was a question. Is defensive line still at this point the most, impressive or most stock position on the Giants roster? I forget how Dan worded it. And my answer is no, I think it's safety. I was that impressed with the group the Giants have at that position. So it is an important spot on the roster, the way they use it, and they certainly have a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, which allows Patrick Graham to do the type of disguising that they do.
And I agreed with your assessment. I wrote the same exact thing, because you're taking into consideration, of course, that Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson are scheduled free agents. So when you don't know what their status is going to be, it's hard to put anything, in my opinion, ahead of the safety position, because you're going to have those three guys. Now, we don't know whether or not they're going to play all 16 games, but you have a good feel. You know what you're dealing with at that position. Now, you could always argue, hey, the more the merrier in the NFL, right, because of the injury bug. But once again, I think versatility is far more of a necessity based on how the safety position is utilized than just saying, hey, the Giants need another safety. Now, granted, guys, if there's a veteran out there who you don't have to break open the piggy bank for, who may have had some ties to New England, I don't think that would be a bad move, but that would be the only move that I could see you adding, just a pure safety, somebody that may have had prior ties to Joe Judge and Patrick Graham's defensive scheme, has some familiarity there, and wants to maybe be a mentor type of a role. maybe similar to a Nate Ebner veteran type of guy. If they wind up losing Ebner and it's somebody that could be a veteran safety who could play some defensive snaps, can get on special teams, that would be, to me, somebody that would have value being added. Outside of that, I just don't really think they need to take a resource financially and plug it in with a safety, just a pure safety.
All right, you want to move to cornerbacks, Paul, or you want to add to that at all?
No, there's really nothing else to say. I mean, we pretty much know where the Giants stand on this.
I'm with you. All right, let's look at cornerback. Obviously, maybe the best player on the Giants team last year was James Bradbury, right up there with the Leonard Williams of the world and all those guys. He was great last year. He was a free agent addition, signed a 3-year contract, and he's one of their starting cornerbacks. Across from him, it was a rotating cast of characters throughout the entire year. You had different guys slide in there. You had the Isaac Yadams of the world. Julian Love went there towards the end of the season. So they don't really have a set second cornerback there, which I think is going to be somebody new they add this offseason. In the slot, they have their rookie from last year, Darnay Holmes, who I thought did a very solid job at cornerback. Got a little hands. He had some penalties called on him, but he's in that position as well. Otherwise, it's not the deepest position in the world. Madre Harper was mostly a special teamer, but he's a guy that played some cornerback. And here's the interesting thing, guys, and I was just looking at the Giants roster to prepare for the show, and I don't know when this was changed, if this was just back from when he was drafted, so I don't want to take a lot out of this. But Julian Love's actually listed as a cornerback on the Giants roster, and I guess that's a good place to start. He played outside cornerback to end the year. To me, if you're playing him in a off scheme, in a heavy zone scheme, or even an off man where he's going to have some help over the top, I think he can play a little outside cornerback. That's what he did at Notre Dame. But if you're going to play a lot of press and man-to-man, that's probably not a spot where he's going to really, in my opinion, succeed. So, Paul, we'll start with you with this one. How do you view Love? Is he a real player here as a potential outside corner to start next year? Or was that simply, oh, man, we need somebody for this spot? Where and when are we going to put him in terms of position-wise in 2021?
Well, understand this. When he was drafted, the plan was for him to succeed Antoine Bethea as the Giants' starting free safety after basically redshirting his first year. That was the plan for him. So it does tell me that initially they thought he would be a better fit in the middle of the field. Now, subsequent to that, did he show them some things, especially at the end of last season against the Cowboys in the regular season finale, that makes them believe otherwise? Perhaps he did. I don't think any of us can answer that honestly right now because we just don't know. It was a small sample size at the end of last year where he showed he could be capable under certain conditions of manning the position. Is that something you want to go through for a full 16 or 17 game schedule? The truth is, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think the coaches even know the answer to that, nor does Dave Gettleman, I would bet. I think it's a situation where when the Giants get to training camp, if they don't have any additional resources at corner, he will be given every opportunity to try to win the job. If they do bring in additional resources, he will be given the opportunity to compete. And if he can outshine the other people, well, then guess what? He gets the job anyway, and it's a win-win for everyone.
I think the benefit here is you have a player that is still on a rookie contract who knows the system and gained some experience this past year. So to Paul's point, you're not hurting yourself by having him in the mix. But what I will say is, and this is what Paul alluded to, if there's any position, guys, on the defensive side of the ball entering training camp, I would say the more the merrier principle applies to corner, probably more so than any other spot.
Totally
and what I mean by that is I think the Giants need to have the philosophy of whoever is playing outside across from James Bradbury, let's have a competition, okay? And let's have these guys compete on a daily basis through the Zoom sessions to the final day of training camp. And then at the very end of that process, we at least know we exhausted all of our resources to find the best consistent option opposite Bradbury. That's not to say that there's not potential on the roster, but I don't think anybody has solidified the job, including Love, regardless of what he showed at the latter part of the season, that I would welcome, if I'm the Giants coaching staff, I'd welcome guys through the draft, I'd welcome veterans through free agency, and let the best man win, more so than any other position that I would point to on the defensive side of the ball.
Lance, that is a perfect transition here as we head to see what cornerbacks are available in free agency in the draft. But first, just want to point out two other players I should mention. Jaron Williams is re-signed by the Giants. He is on their reserve future list at cornerback. So that's just somebody to take note of as we move forward here. Montre Hardage, also somebody that is on a reserve future contract. Again, not sure if they see him as a corner or a safety. He's one of those hybrid guys that Lance was referring to earlier. Quincy Wilson, another guy that is on a reserve future contract. And then Ryan Lewis, who played significant time at cornerback last year, opposite of Bradbury. He is end of the year on injured reserve. So those are other guys that could be in the mix. But to Lance's point, free agency could be an area where, or the draft, can be areas where the Giants look to add some people. But first, I want to remind Giant fans that limited Giant season tickets are on sale now for the 2021 season. In addition to ticket savings, membership benefits include access to exclusive events, experiences, pre-sales, and more. You can lock in your seat starting at just $100. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit Giants.com/tickets for more information. All right, guys, you look at this free agency list, and boy, this, Paul, for me, is one of the scarcest free agency classes at the cornerback position that I've seen in a long time. I'll just throw some names out there for you, then you can take it wherever you want. William Jackson is probably the top guy on the list. He's 28, has had a pretty good career. He's a free agent. Richard Sherman, we know how good he is, but he's going to be 33 next year, coming off a season where he dealt with some injuries. Then you have guys like Desmond King, who's more of a slot guy. You know, Mike Hilton, he's fine, but nothing special. Shaquille Griffin, he's been okay in Seattle as a starter there. Troy Hill, Chidobe Awuzie. The Giants play the Cowboys all the time. Do you think their cornerbacks are great? Brian Poole, he's more of a slot guy. Quentin Dunbar, again, okay. You know, Xavier Rhodes is a guy that had a nice year last year, but he's over 30. Do you count on him still building on that bounce back year? Ronald Darby, we've seen him in the NFC East a ton. We know what his issues are. Jason Verrett, he's had a lot of injury issues. Patrick Peterson, 31, not the player he used to be. Nickel Roby-Coleman, again, more of a slot guy. So it's not a very, very deep cornerback class here, Paul, where there are a bunch of guys where you can sign them and plug them in and say, all right, here's your job, you go and take it.
Well, to be frank with you, John, you know what the rule of thumb is for any general manager. You don't sign a player from the outside unless you believe he's got a legitimate chance to make your team and be better than one of the 53 guys you have. Are you absolutely positive that for the money that some of these veterans are going to want to command, and some of them will get minimum, others will get more than that, are they significantly better than the guys the Giants have to compete at corner right now? I'm not so sure they are.
I'm not sure about it either. I'm not sure about it.
So for that reason, I'm not active. I'm sitting back and I'm not dealing with this position. I don't see throwing money at a veteran corner right now as being a very productive thing to do. Now, at the same time, over the next couple of months, there could be some cap cuts that may wind up being very interesting. But that's for another day, not for this afternoon.
Well, I think the money has to be right, to your point, Paul. I don't think you should spend the money for the sake of spending the money. But I would argue that I do think there is an opportunity for a veteran corner to come in and compete and ultimately win the job outside of James Bradbury.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, you know, I mean, if they feel as if, even if it's a one-year guy and you want to bring him in to stabilize that side of the ball, help mentor some of the young guys, I would say that's worth spending a little money. I think what's interesting, John, about some of the names you threw out in the free agent market, and I have had this approach with all of these previews that we've been going through. I'm not looking at the guys that I know are going to command the big money because I just don't think the Giants have the luxury of being in that game. I'm looking for some of the bargain deals or maybe some of the players coming off the rookie contract. But the problem is, like anything else, you know, we can look at salaries, and a few of the guys, John, you mentioned they're coming off of rookie contracts, but you figure they gain some interest. They're not looking to make $800,000, okay? They're looking to bump that up a little bit. So, you know, if the Giants wanted to spend $2 million on a corner, you know, I don't know what you guys think. Could they afford to do that? I don't think that's crazy if they brought in somebody on a one-year deal for $2 million. I think that's something that they could welcome, or maybe a little bit less than that.
Right, but to my point, it's not somebody that it's not like a move you made with Bradbury last year when you're like, all right, here's our starting cornerback, go ahead and roll.
You know what, Lance? I think you're better off if you're going to delegate, let's say, $2 million to a veteran corner. You're better off waiting to see who gets cut on the back end of the pool than what's sitting out there right now.
Well, we'll probably know before free agency starts, right? I mean, I assume anybody that's going to get cut is probably going to get cut before free agency begins. You know what I mean? Because teams need to get under the cap. So if you're going to make moves, you're going to make the moves early.
Yeah, but then if they need to clear out some moves because they're going to sign somebody and they say, oh, we got to find an extra $3 million or $4 million here because we're signing this big-time ticket, all of a sudden some other guy gets cut a couple of weeks later.
Right, but that would still be at the very beginning of the free agency process if they're signing a big-ticket item.
Again, that's later rather than today.
Right.
My point is today's checklist does not excite me.
Right, no, I understand. When you said later, Paul, I thought you meant like June or July or something like that.
I don't think anyone's going to come free at that point. It's going to be very difficult to do. And if worst comes to worst and they feel like they haven't found the appropriate upgrade and they wind up picking at the waiver wire at the very end. Look, remember when they got Leon Hall?
Yeah,
sure.
Right at the end of training camp. Very
late.
It
Can happen. It's not like impossible, but that's a last resort.
Well,
it turned
they
out
brought
he
in
pretty productive for the season until he got to the playoff game.
I mean, another guy that comes to mind, I'm not saying that he was electric, but Connor Barwin was a late addition, too, on the defensive side of the ball.
He's not a safety, though, or a corner.
No, I'm saying, I didn't say it was the same position. I'm using that as an example of you can bring in a veteran late in the training camp process or even at the beginning of the training camp process.
It can happen, sure.
All right, so let's look at the draft, guys, because I think this is a much more interesting place to look for the Giants this year. Let's talk about the top of the class first, because the Giants could be in the mix at number 11 for a cornerback. There's a chance that no cornerbacks will be off the board in the Giants pick, maybe one, maybe two, depending on what the Broncos and the Cowboys do ahead of them. Those are the two teams that the experts out there, gurus, whatever you want to call them, seem to think could go cornerback here in the first round. And to me, I watched what most people consider to be the three top guys this morning, at least the top three outside guys, Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain, second, and J.C. Horn out of South Carolina. And just in terms, Paul, of raw ability, Caleb Farley's impressive. Like, he's a little bit raw. He'll have some false steps. The guy will get beat. I haven't seen a corner with his type of makeup speed where if he has a false step and he gets a step or two behind the wide receiver, his makeup speed to catch up and make a play on the ball to prevent the catch is extremely impressive. Plus, he's 6'2" and 207. So he might not be the most technically sound guy right now, and it makes sense. He only played 2 years of college football. One is really like two is a full-time starter. Him, to me, though, his tools stand out. And if you get him with a good coaching staff, look out. He has true, and I don't use this word lightly. I never do. He has legitimate shutdown corner, press corner potential if you can get some of the kinks out of the machinery.
I think what you said yesterday, that none of these guys are perfect, can't miss, everything is polished up the way it is and just add water, is accurate. All right? I don't think there's any doubt about that. However, I also think that because of his skill set and because of Surtain's skill set, and Surtain has a lot of intangibles going for him. Obviously, his father with the Miami Dolphins was an outstanding player for a number of years. And look, I'm not saying that the bloodline necessarily translate, but it certainly helps in terms of attitude, mentality, work ethic, knowledge, all those kinds of things. I still think that from what I've seen, more people seem to be a little bit more, I don't know if they think that Surtain is more pro-ready or they just think the intangibles weigh heavier on their scale than Farley, but certainly I have seen more and more people think that Farley could be the number one corner taken.
No, Paul, you're right. By the way, Surtain, much more technically sound, knows what he's doing. Not surprised. Nick Saban, Alabama, right? All that stuff. His dad, all that things. None of that's surprising. I don't think he has the physical tool package that Farley does. But if you want to talk about just like the ability to play the position, this goes back to our quarterback conversation, right? Who has more quarterback skill? Who has more talent to become the better quarterback? You know what I mean? That's the same deal here. If you want to get some guy that can play corner right away, Surtain's your guy. But if you want the guy that, boy, he has such good physical tools. He can be even better than what Surtain is now. I think Farley's your guy, and I think that's kind of how I look at it.
Well, and this is why, again, it's a situation where you have to project him into your system with your coaching staff. Are we going to max him out? Are we going to polish this guy up to be the, quote, shutdown guy that we think he might be able to attain? That's and this is why I think, honestly, John, I think it's pretty unanimous, and I said this to you yesterday, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at across the board at some more of the mocks and stuff. Farley and Surtain, to me, are the two corners who are top 15, and I think that's generally regarded as consensus value for both of them. I don't know necessarily that Horn is right up there. I think he's down a little bit further.
I'll be honest, Paul, I watched Horn this morning. I don't have him far off of Surtain, and here's why. He plays outside and he can play inside. So he has the quickness. I saw him guard 6'3" and 6'4" receivers. I saw him guard 5'10" receivers. He's physical. He gets his eye on the ball. I don't think he has quite the physical tool package of Farley either. I need to look in more. I looked at about 30 minutes of tape on each one of these guys this morning. I need to do more work. But I don't have Horn that far away of Surtain. And this is how I'll phrase it to kind of give the layman a perspective. When I look at Farley and Surtain, and I'll take Horn out of the equation for now, but I think he has a chance to be a really good player too. Remember the old argument, who was better, Darrelle Revis or Richard Sherman?
I never felt that way, but okay.
Okay, but that was always a debate, right?
Yeah.
If I'm making player comparisons, Surtain is more the Richard Sherman style of cornerback. Farley's more the Darrelle Revis style of cornerback in terms of how they play. Like, I don't think Surtain's ever going to be a guy that's going to follow somebody around the field. Surtain's never going to line up in the slot on somebody, ever.
Right.
I think Farley has the chance to do that sort of thing. That's how I kind of separate him in my mind, if you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, that's fine. The point is, in terms of the Giants being injected into this equation at 11, I just don't believe at this point Horn necessarily factors in for need value at 11, where I think the other two guys probably do. But again, the Giants could move down a few spots. Like Fiegels and I have said, we'd go down 5 more spots, and maybe 5 more spots down, Horn becomes part of the equation.
And Lance, I think the question then for you is, how much do you take scheme into consideration here when you're picking this cornerback? We know how much of a heavy zone scheme the Giants played last year. A lot of off coverage. They didn't press a whole lot. Do you pick a corner that you think is better at that? Or do you purposely want to pick a corner that you think can do everything so the Giants can be even more versatile in the type of coverages that they use down in, down out?
I'd go with the latter more so than the former. I don't like picking players based on scheme in general, and I don't have a crystal ball, but do we know that Patrick Graham is going to be the defensive coordinator beyond 2021? I'm not saying that he's going to be let go, but, what happens if another coaching opportunity comes his way?
And Lance, do we know if he doesn't want to add more stuff into the scheme next year?
100%.
Right.
So I never like the idea, and I'm sure, listen, if you polled the GMs across the NFL, they'll give you a variety of different answers. But to me, once again, this goes back to conversations we've had on other shows and what Dave Gettleman was preaching. Remember when it was the whole debate about Saquon Barkley? If the goal is, when you're picking relatively high, for the guy to be having a legitimate opportunity to put on the gold jacket, then I don't think you can afford to get caught up in scheme. I think you need to get caught up in, over the course of the rookie contract, do we think this guy's going to continue to show and make strides and warrant a second contract, regardless of the scheme? So the versatility to me is the most important, and the upside. Because, you guys were talking about Surtain and Farley. Surtain, the way that I look at him is, and I think both of them have good size, so I don't think you're necessarily hurting yourself if you pick either one.
Sure.
Surtain, I think he's going to be a solid corner. He's proven that. He got on the field very early at Alabama, which I know most people would say, well, it's Nick Saban. He recruits a lot of talent. Well, yeah, if you get on the field relatively early in your career, I think that says a lot about you. So I think that was a good sign, the fact that they had confidence in putting him out on the field. But I don't know whether the electricity for Surtain long-term is what Farley can reach. And I think that's what you were alluding to, John. I think maybe you can trigger some elements of Farley's game that he hasn't scratched the surface of yet, whereas Surtain, I think maybe you have a better idea of what truly he could do on the next level. So maybe that's why Farley's got a little bit more upside and intrigue if you were to make a comparison between the two. But once again, schemes are relevant to me. I'm picking who I think has the best overall talent and who I think overall over the course of a rookie contract is going to give me the most. I'm not going to get caught up in whether or not my defensive coordinator is going to be here 2 to 3 years down the road.
I'm with you. I think that's the way you approach it. 100% agree. Just FYI, guys, in terms of depth, from what I can tell, it does not seem to be the deepest cornerback class. If you look at Dane Brugler's, I'll just give 2 examples. If you look at Dane Brugler's top 100 list, he only has 6 cornerbacks in his top 50, and 2 of those guys are slot players. They're not outside players. So that's not a very deep class. You look at PFF, you look at the way they have their cornerback board set up. They only have, 1, 2, 3, 4 in their top 50, but then they have 3 guys between 50 and 60. So it's not the deepest class. So I think the Giants, if they don't pick that cornerback in the first round, that could get a little dicey trying to get a starter in round 2.
Hence why I've been saying now for the last week as we've gone through these things that if the impact player on offense is not there, you have to think about taking one of those top-shelf cornerbacks. I'm not saying it will be the pick, but it's got to be part of the consideration, assuming that the Giants do believe their grade merits it.
Yep, I think that's fair. Lance?
Well, I think the other corners that, you brought up, and I'm looking at some of the mock drafts and just the projections, there's a number of guys that are projected, which is kind of weird, to go between the first and the third round, which to me is so generic because that could mean, just about anything. For example, okay, after the guys that you named, you have Tyson Campbell out of Georgia.
Yep.
Okay, another guy with good size. He's 6'2". They're saying he could go anywhere from round 1 to round 2. Aaron Robinson, who we saw at the Senior Bowl, okay, out of Central Florida. Another guy projected to go 1 to 2. They're a little bit smaller. He's 5'11". So, you're losing the size compared to the other guys. And then Greg Newsome out of Northwestern, okay, you get the size back a little bit more, 6'1". He's projected to go anywhere from rounds 1 through 3. So those, to me, those are like the next 3 guys. But I think there's limitations with all of those players compared to the other 3 that we discussed.
Yeah, so I think it's something to keep an eye on here as you take a look at the cornerback position. But it's certainly one of the top 3 or 4 positions of need. And I think the reason we say that, we just saw how there was a kind of revolving door of players across from James Bradberry. And I think when that happens, I think it's a signal that the team hadn't found somebody at that spot. So I would imagine the Giants would try to find a more reliable player that they could depend on there across from Bradberry.